Glad you decided to join us for another one of our mini messages. We're still in Genesis 18, looking at verses 11 and 12 today. Now, remember, this is all flowing. This is all continuous. So if you haven't listened to the first few of this chapter, really it'd be best for you to back up and kind of check those out before you listen to this one. You can find those on our YouTube page and our Facebook page. Verse 11, it says, Abraham and Sarah were both very old by this time, and Sarah was long past the age of having children. So she laughed silently to herself and said, how could a worn-out woman like me enjoy such pleasure, especially my master, my husband, is also so old? Go back up to the previous verses 9 and 10. He's given the promise again. Abraham's given the promise again by the Lord. The Lord's talking to him. This is Christ. Christ is telling him, this time next year, I'll come back. You're going to have a kid. So Sarah's inside the tent. And as we know, tents don't exactly, dampen sound. The conversation that Abraham was having with the Lord just went right on through the tent, and Sarah's able to listen in. And so as she hears this, she laughs to herself. She laughs. And she has a reason to laugh, because from a human point of view, this was impossible. You think about somebody, I think about people in, I say our church, our congregation that are in their 80s, and somebody comes up and says, hey, this time next year you're going to have a kid. Not only is that funny to hear somebody say, it's the whole idea of it's just funny, right? I mean, it's just so out of step with what we know in the natural world. But see, this is where God comes in, because God moves past the natural world. God's not bound by the things that we are bound by. He moves beyond time and space and nature and science. I mean, you think about it, God put the rules of nature in place. They're His rules to break whenever He feels like it. And this child was so important, and God wanted to show how this was going to work, that I fully believe Abraham and Sarah had been unable to have children because the Lord had stepped in early in their life, because He knew what He was going to do, and said, no children. He literally did this to then bring them to this place of giving them Isaac, and what a blessing it would be to the world, and how God would receive the glory for it. There's no other explanation. When Sarah has a child, there's no other explanation than that God stepped in. That is it. That's the beginning and the end. God stepped into what was happening in that moment, and He took care of it. But she laughs to herself. And it may be that even after these promises in Genesis chapter 17, that Abraham and Sarah were trying to spiritualize these things. They were trying to still think about it as Ishmael would be the child of promise, or maybe a child besides Ishmael from another maidservant. I don't know. But they struggled with this. And I understand it. You'd waited so long. It was so hard to believe that God could do these things. Sometimes we get our hopes up and we think, oh, this is going to work out, and it doesn't, and we're crushed. I think they had been kind of crushed for so long that as this time drew near, they really were struggling, especially Sarah was struggling. And so she laughed to herself at what she felt like was an outlandish promise. But our God's in the business of outlandish promises. See you soon.